People have been using turquoise in the Southwest for thousands of years. It's at the period when people begin to farm, begin to settle down, stay in one place for longer, and be able to acquire more material things that we see turquoise use really take off. And so that happens about 2,000 years ago, maybe 1,500 years ago. But amazingly quickly, we see turquoise be standardized really into 3 different shapes that they are making. And the first of those is a shape that we still make and use today, and those are turquoise pendants. So these are pieces that have been shaped and then drilled at one end. And they're used as earbobs. They're also used in necklaces. The second standardized form are beads. And they made both tubular beads that are longer than they are wide, and most commonly, these little flat beads like this. So they would roughly shape them, drill them, probably with a very small stone drill. They may also have, in some cases, used sand and cactus needles, believe it or not. The third form that people made turquoise in were little flat pieces that were meant for inlay, and we call those tessera. Here's an example. This is a reproduction of a jet frog that was found at Chaco Canyon, so that dates about 1,000 years ago. Shaped from one single piece of jet, and then turquoise is inlaid to make a collar and eyes on the frog. So by 1,500 years ago, we see people consistently making these 3 forms of turquoise. We also see the leftovers from making beads, pendants, and tessera, turquoise debris, and it apparently is still important, still powerful, still turquoise. And we see it being used as offerings when people are making kivas and in other places that show that it's still considered to be a powerful material. Here's an example of how somebody might have used some of this turquoise. So this is a necklace that is primarily shell, and it's shell beads and individual tiny little shells strung into a relatively small necklace. At the bottom, there are 2 small turquoise pendants. This tells us really 2 important things. The first is that pairing of shell and turquoise that we see during the historic period extends back. Shell, because of its origin, symbolizes water. Turquoise, because of its color, symbolizes water. So you have a double water whammy in some ways. It's also really interesting to think that all of the shell is imported into the Southwest from the Pacific and from the Gulf of California. The turquoise is probably local, but look at the proportions. There's a lot more shell than there is turquoise. And that tells you that a material that had to be imported from hundreds of miles away is less expensive, less costly to use than the turquoise that was locally available but took a lot of work to wrest out of the ground into shape, into its final form. As far as we can tell, that same meaning for turquoise of water, sky, plenty, health, protection, all of that is there in the past. And one of the ways that we see that is by looking at other objects and how they symbolize those same things, those same quantities. And this, at first glance, looks nothing like turquoise. What we have is a pitcher that was broken in antiquity, and then somebody sanded it down to make the edge smooth again. It was slipped with white paint and then painted with a black paint. And it's a Chaco or a Gallup black on white. And it dates from about 1,000 years ago. 2 interesting things about this pitcher. The first is the shape. We call this shape sometimes a shoe pot. The other name for the shape is a duck pot. And in this case, you pretty clearly have something that looks more like a duck than like a shoe. You can imagine that this is probably a water bird effigy, something that is meant to capture some of the power of a water bird and the meaning of a water bird. Now, this black on white pattern, people may well have looked at this pattern and understood that it stood in for blue-green when they didn't have the technology to fire a pot and have it be blue-green in color. We say that based on painted wooden designs that we have found at a number of sites, including at Chaco Canyon and Chetroketle, one of the great houses. The same pattern that we see here shows up painted blue-green on those painted images. And those painted pieces were probably used ceremonially. So in the past, people may have looked at this picture and in their mind, they knew that it stood for blue-green and the entire power of blue-green, the place of origin, water, sky, health, having enough to eat, and having lots of happy, well-fed children.